The market just became crowded with too many AI solutions. When something's failing in the DSO industry, it's too much over. If you don't have an adequate implementation plan, people are not going to use it. So you've got to go through the dance of education, integration, implementation, and then you get adaptation. There was a proverb that I learned about in college. He who chases two rabbits catches none.
So if 2025 was the year of same-store growth, we're looking at 2026 now. Name 2026. What are we looking at? Welcome back to the Dental Economist Show with me, your host, Mike Huffaker. Before we get started, just a quick request. If you are enjoying the podcast, if you enjoy the content that we put out, if you could take a few moments to like, share, or even better, write a review. Your support means the world to us, and it will help us continue to deliver excellent information to the dental industry. Today, I'm joined by a man that needs really no introduction. Brian Colao, director of the DSO Industry Group at Dykema, the man who has brought to us the definitive conference in dentistry, the Dykema conference that happens every single summer, and is also doing really amazing things throughout the year, really propelling the space forward and supporting the DSO industry with unique events, thought leadership, and guidance to help us kind of go to the next level. He also has won numerous awards, including probably the most prestigious one of all, which is the Planet DDS 2023 DSO Leadership Award. So we're going to chat a little bit today about, a little retrospective of 2025. And as we head into 2026, maybe some things that we can expect. Brian, you're the first three-time guest of the Dental Economist Show. Welcome back. How are you?
Well, Mike, I said if you ever got good at this, I'd come on the show, and the very first time I was on it doesn't count because I don't know what you were doing back then, but you recently had your 100th show, I remember. And, now I don't know what this is, 100 and something, 103, 104 or something, but, you got good at it. So now that you're good at it, too much is never enough and it never gets old to be on this show.
Yeah, well, appreciate that. And yeah, the 100th episode was none other than Pat Bauer as well. So I had to wait for 100 episodes and practice on you a few times before I felt comfortable enough to invite Mr. Pat Bauer to join the show.
Yeah, but Pat's kind of patient. Pat was at the very first Dykema meeting we ever had. And I assure you, our very first Dykema with 41 people at it, was nothing like what we have now. And he's a good sport, Pat, has always been.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So before we jump into kind of the year that has been and what is coming up in 2026, I want to do a little get to know Brian Colao a bit. And I know you love these things. It's like maybe your favorite thing ever, but this will be a painless one. It's going to be a this or that scenario. Just your preference.
I went on the one where I had to eat those hot wings, after that, it's just kind of like, nothing's going to faze me. You're right. These are not my favorite things, but after ingesting 10 of those ridiculous wings recently on one of those, whatever, Mike, go ahead.
All right. Well, you did do that. So I'll start with this one. Spicy or mild?
Well, mild. I had a terrible upset stomach the rest of the day after I ate those 10. I mean, thank God I only had to take a single bite. You didn't have to eat the whole wing. I don't know what would have happened if I had to eat the whole wing.
All right. So mountains or beaches?
I've gone back and forth in my life on this, and I've had houses on both places. I think I would say beaches at the moment, but at times it's been mountains.
Would you rather go to a live concert or watch a movie?
Well, it depends. I mean, if it's somebody I want to see, I'd rather go to a live concert.
All right, so a couple more, and then we'll move on to the serious stuff. Are you a night owl or a morning person?
Having spent a lot of my life getting up at 5 a.m. to train for wrestling, I'm not a morning person anymore. I have been a great deal of my life. Now I don't get up that early unless I have to.
So you've retired the getting up super early, and
there's no more 5-mile runs at 5 a.m. or running up hills, or coach used to make us go in the swimming pool at one point at 5 a.m. There's no more of that going on.
All right. Are you a text guy or a call guy?
Depends. I've embraced kind of both. I think just because of time constraints, text is a wonderful thing these days, but I do like to pick up the phone and talk to human beings. I do.
Sports or art?
Sports.
And are you a think it through kind of guy or a trust your gut?
Well, I think you got to do both. I think trusting your gut should be the tiebreaker, but you should be thinking things through.
Perfect. Thank you for indulging me with that. And now we can move on to the serious topics at hand. 2025 and what 2025 was. Yeah, okay, fine. If you could have dinner with any, but no, I'm just joking. Uh, all right. So 2025, Brian, we've talked quite a few times this year. And I think at the outset of the year, there was an initial thought that we would see M&A loosen up a bit. We maybe thought the interest rates were going to drop faster than they did. We thought the environment would be a little bit different than what it turned out to be. If you reflect back at the beginning of 2025 and some of the things that you thought would happen, what are some of the things that did happen and some of the things that you saw ended up panning out a little bit differently than expected?
Yeah, I mean, the overall economic conditions, meaning stock market stuff, did very well. And I felt like under the new president, the stock market would go up. I mean, we're not stock traders here, but I felt like it would. And I think in terms of just for the overall average investor that has a mutual fund or is in the stock market, they did do well. And that did come true. But I also thought, rather, somewhat incorrectly, that would translate to the DSO M&A markets and the healthcare M&A markets. But unfortunately, the interest rates had to go down for that. They stubbornly, despite, I think there were 3 reductions at the end of 24, there were none in 25 until September. So you went like basically almost an entire 9 months with no interest rate reductions, to the point where, the president was threatening to fire the chair of the Fed. That didn't happen, but it got so bad with the level of frustration. The president was publicly, threatening, the head of the Fed and a whole bunch of things. So it was really muted. I wrote an article in the Lead magazine by Woman in DSO about this. I called it the muted recovery. And that's what it was. It was better than 24. There were some transactions, a lot of smaller deals, kind of occurred with some regularity, but the whole, reignition of the M&A markets, it did not happen. As we sit here today, we're in early December. I've got a couple deals I'm working on that might close by the end of the year. A couple of them might be noteworthy enough. There'll be some press releases and people will hear about it. But even if those close, I think a muted recovery is the right way to describe it. So I think overall, in terms of stock market and jobs, I think the new presidential administration was sort of as advertised. But, we got a specialized marketplace here, the DSO healthcare markets, and some specific things have to happen, for those to get reignited. And we're just not there yet. I am somewhat optimistic about 26, but we're just not there yet as we're wrapping up 25.
Now, what do you think the impact of tariffs are? Because obviously that played a huge part with the Fed's decision to not reduce rates. They felt that they were in largely uncharted territories, were unsure what the impact would be on inflation and others, and they just kind of held tight. For our industry specifically.
Well, a couple things. I mean, all bad. The interest rates remained high because the uncertainty of the tariffs did not create favorable conditions where for the first 9 months of the year, the Fed was comfortable, doing anything with the interest rates. That's first of all. And then the second thing that happened is the prices all went up. Pretty much prices went up, things that were already high due to inflation went up even further due to tariffs. And it just created uncertainty, and that is not the sort of thing that in any way helps M&A markets or, restores confidence, that kind of uncertainty, and the way the tariffs went down too, right? It wasn't like for 6 months, a president was saying, we're going to put a tariff on country XYZ and it's going to be, 10%. And if we don't get what we want, it's going to be 10%. And then 6 months happens and you're like, okay, guess what? It's 10%. And everybody knew it. That's not the way these tariffs went down. They went down like, it's 50%, it's 100%, it's 20%, it's 10%, it's canceled. Oh, we were just joking when we said yesterday we were going to do it. Oh, now we're not doing it, joking. We're going to do it again. And, that's unprecedented. I've never seen that, at least in the years I've been alive. I've never seen anything like that. I have seen presidents telegraph something like, we have this particular issue with this country, and if they don't straighten it out, we're going to be forced to do this type of tariff. And then, if it's not straightened out, that type of tariff gets entered. But just putting tariffs on all of the developed world and, putting them on, taking them off, putting them back on, it was unprecedented. And I think it just generated so much uncertainty. The interest rates, didn't move at all for 9 months. We really didn't have any significant, M&A activity that you would say, hey, the markets are back here. Nothing like that happened. And, unfortunately, that was a big surprise. Another big surprise for our industry was, despite this administration being very pro-business, they decided healthcare fraud was going to be a super priority of theirs. And they've actually initiated a lot more enforcement actions than, the Biden administration did, or even some of the other administrations. And I just didn't see that coming from this president. I didn't think, he's a big pro-business, less regulation, drill, baby, drill type thing. I just didn't think we would see that. And we've seen a huge uptake in healthcare investigations, particularly in dentistry. So those were sort of the two things I didn't see coming when I had this last year and I made my predictions. I didn't see just the unpredictable nature of the tariffs coming, the way that they went down. I didn't see that. And I didn't see the huge uptick in healthcare regulatory fraud enforcement. I didn't see, that really coming.
Yeah, no, that was definitely surprising. And speaking about the tariffs piece, it was almost like that Oprah meme that you see where people are like, you get a car, gifts for everybody. And it was like tariffs for everyone. It felt very chaotic for a very long period of time. And the uncertainty, I think, is really detrimental for people. People like to know how to plan for things. It's made it very, very challenging for a lot of people to do so.
Well, your expenses become a moving target, right? Everybody, any reputable business anyway is going to budget and forecast at the beginning of the year. They're going to have some type of budget. And if you can't predict, give or take, within a very thin, margin of error, what your expenses are going to be for supplies and goods, you're in a very scary place. And I think, unfortunately, they were announcing tariffs and they were taking them down. Then they were saying it doesn't apply to these things. Oh, yes, it does. It doesn't apply to that. And you couldn't figure it out. If you were a CFO and you were asked to do your forecast for next quarter, the margin of error is not going to be 1 or 2 or 3%. You had to allow for a large margin of error. And it's just hard. It's hard to invest in capital expenditures. It's hard to invest in new technologies. It's certainly hard to acquire things and do M&A if that's going to be the unstable, unpredictable environment you're going to be in. And that's been the tale of 2025, at least with the M&A markets for DSOs.
And now heading into 2025, I think one of the persistent themes that was discussed was same-store growth. And, that was a bit of carryover. It kind of started to pick up in 2024, but it seemed to be a large focus and certainly kind of the topic du jour for people. Now, we've talked about some of the data and we've looked at some of the data, and it's really a mixed bag. And there's been practices that have been successful at driving it, and there's been many that have not. What, from your perspective, are the groups or practices that are experiencing successful same-store growth doing that the ones that are not are missing?
It's such a good question, Mike, and it's such a complicated answer, okay? the reason I'm going to answer it, but it's comp. There's a lot of reasons. The first thing is fear and uncertainty, which we've just been discussing over the last few minutes. I know a lot of organizations had planned on investing heavily in innovative technologies and other things that were going to promote same store growth. And when the tariffs and everything just became so uncertainty, they just kind of, postponed their plans to do that. So that's the first thing. I mean, if you don't go out and actually utilize the technologies and implement them, of course, you're not going to experience it. So that would be, I think, a good portion of the market just deferred their plans to do so. And because they deferred their plans to do so, they're not going to reap the benefits because they didn't do it. Those that did it, there's a very delicate dance, and I'm, presenting on this all over the world. I just got back from Europe and I presented on this, and there's a real delicate dance. One, you've got to have, if we're talking about implementation of new and innovative technologies that can promote same-store growth. When we talk about same-store growth, of course, we mean getting new patients, doing more with existing patients, and doing a top-down analysis of your organization to eliminate unnecessary expenses, lower your overhead. There's a lot of tools that can do this. The first step is you've got to have education and you've got to get buy-in, at least in DSO organizations. We're not solo practices. The C-suite might think this is a great idea, but now you've got to educate the dentists and their staff in the affiliated offices. And if you don't educate it right and they don't know what the tool does or how to use it, that's a big problem. Second, it's got to get integrated with what you're using, your PMS system and other stuff. And if it's not integrated with your PMS system, then it's going to be a big deterrent to people using it. Assuming that everybody's educated and it is integrated, then you got to talk about what's the implementation plan look like for dozens or hundreds of offices. And if you don't have an adequate implementation plan, people are not going to use it. So you've got to go through the dance of education, integration, implementation, and then you get adaptation. But it's like that obstacle course, that American Ninja obstacle course. You ever watch that show? It's like 10 people start out and I don't remember, but all 10 don't finish at the end of that show where somebody climbs up and rings that bell or hits that button. It's like 3 or 4 out of 10, hit that button. And maybe this isn't quite as hard as the American Ninja obstacle course, but it's an obstacle course. You got to go through education, integration, implementation, and then you get adaptation. And there are victims that don't make it through there, that started the process with the best of intentions and they didn't make it to the end. And I don't know what it is. Maybe, I don't want to guess at, you're getting some really good statistics at Planet DDS on things that you're running. But, if you've got 10 organizations, starting this obstacle course, all 10 are not going to finish. And it's, maybe, even 3 or 4 or something aren't going to make it to the end. So, that's been a big obstacle. But again, the organizations, I think your question was, that effectively do this, they've got, education, they've got integration, they've got implementation, and then they get adaptation. And those are the ones that can do it. You fail at any step. You haven't properly educated. You're not integrated. You don't have a good implementation plan. It's going to be on the obstacle course. You fell in the water. You made it almost there and then you fell in the water and you're going to be bogged down. And we've very much seen that in 2025.
Yeah, I think it's a great call out. So there's the failures of implementation of what could be good tools that were intended to help drive growth and results. There's the uncertainty, the fear and uncertainty, and I'll add one more that I think is maybe flies under the radar a little bit, but it ties to the uncertainty element. And that is with the influx of AI and all the new tools, I think there was like some level of decision fatigue that people were experiencing where it was almost became challenging to navigate. Like who's going to be here tomorrow? In the same way, like American Ninja, who's going to finish the obstacle course? When you have 20 startups all doing the same thing that are all small companies, you start to go, which one of these has the right backing? Who's got the right team? Who's going to win? And you're hearing a lot of mixed messages. And I think that there was, in large part of the first half of the year, uncertainty about what AI was. Education has helped. I think people are getting more comfortable with it. And now as we ease into maybe the new normal of AI, people are starting to get more comfortable pulling the trigger on some of these things in ways that they weren't earlier.
Well, they still gonna have to work at it. I mean, it's like if you ever been to Atlanta, I love that city. They say if you call something Peachtree, it increases the value to a point, and then everything became Peachtree. And now when you're down in Atlanta, you're like, oh, I got Peachtree fatigue. Peachtree Plaza, Peachtree Lane, Peachtree Street, Peachtree Plaza. After all, it's too much. And it's the same thing with AI. It just became flooded. The market just became crowded with too many AI solutions. And I can tell you, I get approached by a lot of AI companies that want me to represent them or help advise them. And talk about an obstacle, at probably 1 out of 10, I'm interested in helping. And 9 out of 10, I got to tell, in some polite way, I just don't see a need for it. Like, I see what you're doing, but I just don't think dentistry needs that right now. Or I think somebody else is already doing it effectively. And, you're going to be competing in a crowded field. And I just don't see the need for another one, sort of doing this right now. And, some of them don't like it. They don't handle it. They're disappointed. Everybody wants to believe their solution is the best, but that unfortunately is the simple fact of AI right now in dentistry. There's a lot of background noise and a lot of stuff that is just ranges from either just a shiny new thing that's shiny but you really don't need it, or it's maybe not even going to work. Like, there as much money that's been invested in it, and as well-intentioned as the company may be, there's stuff I look at to this day that I just don't think it's going to work. And it's always a shame when somebody stood up a company and people are they're spending their time, effort, and money kind of doing this. And maybe just because, I'm in my 31st year of being in the industry, I have a decent enough, I'm not right 100% of the time, but I do have a decent enough gut instinct sense for if something's really needed or going to work or not. And there's a lot of things that, I'm looking at right now and I'm just like, it's just not needed. I just don't think that it's going to be successful. So it's continuing, and to the point where I'm making a big emphasis on certain presentations and things I'm going to do and certain speakers I'm inviting. We're going to focus on all things AI and how to differentiate the background noise from value-added innovations. I mean, I'm going to be spending a lot of time on that in 26, and hopefully I can add some value to the DSO community and helping work through, those things. Because I think a lot of folks, nobody's really, only a handful of people are trained to even figure out AI. There wasn't a single AI course in existence in any of my schooling that I ever, you could watch the Terminator movie. You want to watch a Terminator movie? That was pretty much your education. Skynet became self-aware and it killed people. I do think if AI becomes aware based on some stuff we're doing, they're probably not going to like the humans. We're probably not going to, like, if AI tried to logically analyze our species, they're going to be like, yeah, as soon as we get rid of these people, we'll make some real progress over here. I think the Terminator movies had that part of it right, but there were no courses or anything that I took. And, maybe if you graduated last year, you might have taken an AI course, but absent that, there's really not anything. So the people that are evaluating this are largely, at least by education and training, not qualified. Now, me, I've tried to take a crash course. I don't have any education or training, but I've tried to gather up a lot of the industry experts in AI and have them present to me, and fortunately, a lot of them want to speak at Dykema, so they're willing to spend time with me and present to me and tell me all about, their products. So I think, by the school of hard knocks, the school of trial and error, I've tried to learn really hard about this. But the average person, working in management, somewhere in a C-suite or middle management at a DSO, they haven't gotten specialized education or training or an AI or the chief clinical officer. They went to dental school. They didn't learn about AI. So they're doing the very best they can to figure all this stuff out. But it's very, very hard. And it's very, very hard to differentiate something that's a flash in the pan from something that's really going to change the industry.
It's a great point. I think the education system is still largely catching up to even being, like you mentioned, if you graduated recently. Even then, I think that there's probably still a big gap in the education that's being provided from an AI perspective. And going back to a previous point that you made, yeah, the promise of it is, the reality is falling short of the promise in many cases. And a lot of what we're seeing are features, not necessarily full-fledged products or companies, which makes it really hard to navigate And it was a great point about the integration and practice management software, because if you're missing the interoperability there and that integration, it's really hard to get the benefit out of it.
I mean, it's one of the reasons I like Planet DDS. They've got a ton of integrations and they've made that a priority. Sometimes people ask me, why are you always, complimenting, Planet DDS, and why are you making these posts about Planet D? Because I like the integration. I mean, I feel like, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the major ones for me is they were committed very early on to integrating a lot of these solutions, into the system, and you have to have that, and I think that's really, really important. But everybody's still got work, a lot of work to go on that, but it's really important.
Yeah, no, it's that's a foundational belief of ours of being Dental OS. Now I want to shift the conversation just a little bit, and you put on your DSO executive hat, and you join as the CEO of a distressed group. Let's say it's a mid-sized group, 20 to 50 offices. There's a lot of practices that are having negative same-store growth. There's margin pressure. There's budgetary constraints. And it's really a challenging situation to navigate. What are some of the things you look to do? I know, we know what the technology piece can do, but that's just one element of kind of an overall kind of approach to a DSO business. And I think that there's maybe more people in this situation right now than we give credit for that are seeking the light at the end of the tunnel to maybe do a turnaround. What would be some of the guidance that you'd offer in that situation?
Well, I mean, you might have, I think you were present. I know you gave your own presentation, so I don't know if you had time to listen to this part of mine, but at our recent leadership event you were at, I talked about the anatomy of a failing DSO. I'm asked this all the time, and I went through sort of a, kind of a checklist of things, because again, the old saying, if you've seen one DSO, you've seen one DSO. So they're structured differently. So what plagues one and what is bringing one down might be totally different, for another. It's not like every DSO has the same problem, but usually the culprits that I would run through. One, too much overhead. It's the biggest one. When something's failing in the DSO industry, it's too much overhead. I've seen crazy amounts of overhead. People miscalculated, what type of management and C-suite team, and administration was necessary. So it's very seldom that I see a failing or a struggling DSO where overhead's not a big problem, where you don't got to go in there and you got to address it. So that would be, sort of one thing, in particular. Then you start to go down and look at other things. You start to say, are we integrating specialty here? Is there opportunities to, get more revenue through integration of specialty or new lines of, business that we're missing? Are there missed opportunities? And, there tend to be, some in there. Then you start to look at, treatment acceptance. And sometimes you'll see you have, Denticon is getting good studies on this, with the KPIs, but you'll go through and you'll say, why is nobody accepting treatment? What's the problem here? And there's a lot of reasons, for it that, it could be prices too high. It could be improper training of the people answering the phone. They're not asking the right questions. It could be taking too long to get an appointment. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but then you got to attack, treatment acceptance. Sometimes you got to attack the marketing plan. Why is our marketing plan not, are our patient acquisition costs too high? Or why are our marketing efforts not yielding, new patients? And you kind of got to run through it. Then you may want to say, what type of, new technologies are we using or not using here? And are there new solutions that could help us? Would real-time access to KPIs be helpful? Would diagnostic AI let us ethically do more cases? Are our patients in a situation where they can't afford treatment and we don't have an adequate patient finance plan here? Is there a membership plan we can put in place here, that for patients who don't have insurance? Are we monetizing, watch spots? Is Curadont going to help us here by Vivardis? What's our revenue cycle management look like? And that's another big one. Okay. I should have maybe covered that at the beginning. overhead tends to be a problem, and RCM. So if you told me you got a failing organization and I haven't even looked at it, I would say 75% of the time there's going to be a problem with overhead and there's going to be a problem with RCM. Then we start working through all the other progressions that I've been talking about. But those things tend to be the culprit. Sometimes there's a giant regulatory burden. Medicaid came after them and said that, they got to repay $3 million, and that's putting a drag on it until we get that resolved. Sometimes there's specific situations that can come up, but the most common ones are going to be too much overhead, issues, with RCM, issues with treatment acceptance. Those are probably going to be, a big part of why something's struggling.
Yeah. And I like what you did at the end there, which was draw it into a focus. Because the one other thing I would add is, and I've seen this, is groups that they're chasing everything at once. And it becomes really, really hard to become good at this broad swath of functions.
Well, there was a proverb that I learned about in college. I think it was an American Indian proverb from American Indians. And it was something like, he who chases two rabbits catches none. And
yeah.
it kind of made a lot of sense. You got to focus on one thing. If you're chasing everything, you may get nothing. And it really, really applies when you're talking about all these new solutions out there.
Absolutely. All right. So if 2025 was the year of same-store growth, we're looking at 2026 now. Name 2026. What are we looking at?
Well, I think we can expect, by hook or by crook, the interest rates are going to go down. Okay, so we're going to have an environment that's, let's say, the most favorable since before the drought of June of 22. The drought of June of 22 hit. The last half of June of 22 was not favorable. 23 was a very bad year. 24 was not terribly favorable either. And this year was better, but maybe not good enough. I think we're going to cross a line in 26 where it's finally going to be favorable enough to do deals that make sense. Meaning this isn't the mad gold rush. It's not like, oh, we're just going to do everything. No, but the environment is favorable enough that if the deal makes sense, we're going to do it. Right? Parts of 23, 24, 25, even if it made sense and we wanted to do it and on paper, it looked like it was good, the environment might have been too tricky to do a deal. I think 26, we finally crossed the threshold where if the deal makes sense and there's synergies on both ends and we should do it, that the environment is probably good enough not to be the obstacle. We can get the deal done. So that'll be, a big improvement, I think, from at least the last couple of years. So that'll be, gosh, Mike, it's been if it's 22, it's 3.5 years. Gosh, I was thinking 2, but I'm adding it up on the show right now. It's 3. And it was half of 22, then 23, 24, 20. Gosh, it was 3.5 years. Yeah, it's going to be the best environment since that. I think also, we're moving past some of these tariffs and the craziness. So I feel like organizations, DSO organizations are finally going to be able to invest in new technologies, without saying, oh, we intended to do it, now we've got to postpone it. I think they're going to be able to do that. And I think same-store growth is here to stay. I think even when M&A returns, and by the way, I don't think for a long time it's going to be like 2021 where every 10 minutes somebody's doing a deal. I think the best we can hope for in the next couple of years is just, slow and steady wins the race. Slow and steady deals. They're not going to be growing on trees, but there's going to be a steady, consistent flow of deals that make sense. So even when that returns, a slow and steady, consistent, set of deals that make sense, people are still going to want to do same store growth, because the only reason you'd want to abandon same store growth is if we return to 2021 and everybody's just buying everything all the time and you don't even have time to focus on anything but what you're buying. We're not going to be there. And we need a dual track to increase EBITDA. We need to buy more EBITDA when it needs to make sense. And we need to increase EBITDA through same-store growth all the time. That needs to be a 24/7 job. So I think people are going to really be able to, invest in new technologies and new solutions that are going to, contribute to same store growth. And I think people are getting better at it. There's been, trial and error over the last 2 and 3 years. And I think a lot of organizations have learned from mistakes and figured out, what's going to be best for their organization and what's not. And 26 is the year we're finally going to see, you know, um, we're going to reap the value of that. We're finally going to the fruits of the labor are going to come to fruition on that. There's been a lot of false starts and stops and things, but I think people are figuring it out to the point where we're going to see significant progress on same store growth.
I think that's really well said. I love the deals that make sense part. So that's kind of the caveat from where some of the deals took place 3 years ago that maybe didn't make as much sense, at least.
Yeah. The term of art is highly selective. You're seeing highly selective M&A and de novos. In 2021, you just saw, like a flood of M&A and de novos just falling from the sky. Now it's highly selective M&A and de novos, AKA deals that make sense, that, are going to add value on both ends, pricing that is appropriate, not overpriced, that makes sense, a fair price to the seller and a fair price to the buyer. That's not, because what you're seeing, unfortunately, or you've seen it unfold, and there's still a little more, stuff that's going to unfold, is people paid prices in 21, and 20 that right from the start, it was not possible for them to get the return they were hoping for, and they didn't know it. It wasn't obvious at the time, but now when you look back at what's happened with the market, it's not going to be possible for them to get the return that they want. So in 26, when you do a deal at the onset, at the very beginning, you got to pay a price that allows you, a substantial chance. I mean, maybe not 100%, but you get a substantial likelihood of being able to get the return you want at that price.
Yeah. And it seems, at least from my perspective, conversations, interactions, and of course, I've was at the event that we did at Disney, which was fantastic. And some of the conferences that have been taking place, the conversation does seem to have changed. It seems like there's a bigger focus on groups becoming more disciplined operationally, with a greater appetite to understand and implement new solutions, to standardize, to bring in centralization, to bring in additional specialty and lines of business where it makes sense. So I think the message that you've been sharing is resonating with folks. And what I'm hearing you say is that there's going to be a little bit of redemption in 2026 for those that have already made those investments and have pursued that path and are kind of figuring out those unlocks to same store growth. But at the same time, for the groups that haven't started that yet, that maybe they've been delaying because of the uncertainty and the other challenges, they might have to expect to be either in a holding pattern for a little bit longer or have a delayed transaction because they're not looking for fixer-uppers out there in the marketplace generally at this point.
Yeah, it's like one of those where, you've got to, if you've seen it, you've got to load, the rocket up. You can't just launch it. You've got to really, what if it's a spring, you got to crank it and crank it and crank it. And then the thing explodes and you're like, okay, we got it. But there's a lot of cranking that's got to go before the thing can just explode. And I think that's what's happened, at least this year in the industry. People are reloading and, recalibrating. A lot of organizations had to pivot. They started doing one thing and they had to do something else. And by doing that, their EBITDA maybe took a step back because they had to change. And now, they're just going to start really in 26 to reap the benefits of all the improvements that they made. Because sometimes basically it's going to be one step back for two steps forward, but you've got to take the step back and then maybe you go two steps forward. So you're technically like a little bit ahead, but nobody's throwing a party. And it's only after 7, 8, 9, 10 times where you go one step back, but two steps forward that you've gained enough traction that you're like, oh, wow. Okay. Now we see the improvement. I mean, the market conditions, Mike, just didn't allow like, hey, we're going to do this and it's 6 steps forward. It didn't allow that. What the market conditions allowed for is you're going to take one step back, then you're going to move 2 steps forward. Then you're going to go one back again, then 2 steps forward. And it just takes several months or a year at that pace before you look down and you're like, oh yeah, now I see. Yeah, you've pulled ahead of the pack now. And that's where we've been. But I think everybody's been doing most of 25, the one step back, or some cases it could be 1.5 steps back for 2 steps forward. So you're moving, but you're not moving that much. And it takes a whole year before you say, yeah, all those half steps have finally added up. And now I see where we've pulled away. And I think you're going to see that in 26. You're going to see some organizations really start to excel and pull out of, instead of a little bit of, the cumulative effect of a half step, is start to really, now they're going to be way ahead in 26 is what I think.
But one of the important things to recognize in what you were just saying also is the step back. I think where I see challenges often in groups these days is it's terrifying to do anything that would potentially, for a short term, set you back in order to propel you forward.
The fear has been killing people. I mean, you might have, when I did my presentation, the organizations that are doing the best are not, they're analytical. They're not afraid. They're welcoming the challenge. I've seen fear do crazy things at organizations. I've seen people fire everybody. I've seen people hire everybody. They thought hiring more, firing more, people not do anything. Just continue to let the thing sort of maybe not sink, but if it's a boat, it just kind of lists, it just stays there. It's not going anywhere in the water because people were afraid, I see where this solution could help, but I'm going to have to spend money. And if I spend money, that's going to take a questionable situation and back it up even more. Whereas, I think the ones that have come out of it have just said, hey, we can't be afraid. We're in a situation where, maybe, on a scale of 1 to 10, we're on a 5 out of a 1 to 10. We want to be an 8 or a 9, we're a 5, and we're willing to be a 4.5 for 3 or 4 months, meaning we got to spend some money here. We even have to go a little bit further, and now we're going to be a 4.5 out of a 10 for a few months. And then next time you look at us, we're a 7 or we're a 6. We've bounced out of this, and it's a scary thing. I mean, it's like that thing. I've listened to Warren Buffett and others talk about it, and Warren Buffett will tell you, and it's easy to hear him say it, but try executing this when the market is crashing and it's going down and everybody's panicked. Warren Buffett's out there buying stuff. Like he's out there like accumulating stuff with a smile on his face. Like he's thrilled about what he's doing and everybody else is panicked. And, in our market here over the last couple of years, there's been a small amount of Warren Buffett type people that when everything was going down, they were willing to invest even a little more, even if it made their organization even a little weaker so that they could bounce and go better. But most of the market just kind of just stood there and, said, look, we're not going to make that investment. We're not going to spend this money. We're going to wait and see. We're going to kind of see what happens. And, for those organizations, it just takes them a little longer to work their way out of all this stuff. And this is very hard. I mean, I'm not criticizing anybody. I've been there where markets have crashed and some people have suggested, well, maybe you should buy more. And I'm like, yeah, you're crazy. I'm just going to sit here and, sort of wait this thing out. I am not criticizing anybody that did this because, there's no guarantees, on those things. But if you talk to Warren Buffett, he's pretty confident when it's crashing, he should be buying more. But it's hard to do that when things are bad.
Absolutely. Now, look, I know we're just entering 2026 here, but it's never too soon to talk about Dykema. I know you think about it virtually year round, but just curious as you're thinking about it, I know it's still a ways off. It's going to be in July this year, correct? And we'll be back at the Gaylord
July 15th through the 17th, back at the Gaylord in Denver, Colorado. That's right.
Anything, any like tricks up your sleeve that you can share at this? I know you're going to have plenty of them, but any initial thoughts of things that might make it a little bit different or things that you're going to be focusing on this year?
Well, there's going to be more pyro. I went all the way up to Minnesota to meet with the best indoor pyro company in America because I'm not. So they keep telling me 28-foot ceilings. You just can't do it. You're going to set the thing on fire. I think a fire marshal's comment, which true as it may be, I didn't appreciate it. It was like you caused a fire outside. I'm not going to let you cause a fire inside was a remark I heard one time. It bothered me. But it's going to be bigger and better. I mean, it has to be. I mean, that's why, it's no small thing that people want to come and we keep setting record crowds. And the reason I feel like we keep setting record crowds is it just becomes bigger and better. And then word of mouth keeps, spreading and people want to come. So, it's going to be bigger and better. I've sat down, with some new technology companies on some new technology we're going to do on stage, some laser type things and other things. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but it's going to be really, really impressive. I think it wasn't that long ago that you and I were sitting down and we were talking about the walkout. People are now like, what's the walkout going to be? What's going to happen? Yeah, it's going to be it's going to be pretty incredible, this year. And some of the other stuff, on the say just the technology. I mean, of course, the content's going to be good. I've lined up really, really solid speakers. We're going to release the agenda probably around the first of the year. Everybody will see it. It's going to be a real solid agenda, but just the technology, and there's going to be a lot more workshops. One thing that I will say, just because I think I'm proud to sort of say this. I'm not going to talk about everything, but one, because you're here with me, that I'm proud to say is Planet DDS and is going to, on the big stage, talk about their KPIs. And I feel like, you deserve a shout out for that, because the industry really needed some solid KPIs for DSOs. It didn't exist in the marketplace, and I guess it was a breakout presentation, set a record. We had like 140 people in a breakout. It was standing room only. They were out into the hall. The fire marshal was like, hey, you can't be standing here. Something's got blocking doors and exits and stuff. That it was that kind of situation. And then, you did a great job at our recent leadership event, got incredible feedback on, DSO KPIs. So there will be a big stage presentation for Planet DDS's DSO KPIs. It'll be updated, of course, for the summer, with all of the new statistics. But, that's one that we're real proud of. And there's several others that are like brand new, never been on the big stage before, that I'm going to put out there, So I think, look, the goal is to make it, as hard as it is, bigger and better than even it was last year.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, look, I've gotten to know you, and I know that kind of your ethos is connecting people, and you really facilitate that at Dykema. And before we wrap, I'll ask you just kind of one more personal question to just make it extra awkward before we end. But were you always a connector? Like, where did that come from? Thinking back even to like your college days or your early career, or at what point did you determine like, this is actually a really important thing and it's part of who I am?
That's a really good question. I was very outgoing and sociable in college. I was captain of the wrestling team. I did a few things, I was, but not to the extent that I've been the last 15 years. And really, I had a mentor that said to me about 15, 20 years ago when I was still pretty young. And he said, and he was at that time, he was the highest paid partner in the whole organization. And he said to me, there's two ways to look at this. One way is that, I got to fight for what's for me, and I got to take away from other people to get that's for me. He said a lot of partners will do that. You'll see that. A lot of people will do that. A lot of people will even be successful, but that's sort of how they did it. He said, but I found those people are like, this successful. They're successful, but they're this successful. This guy's been like this successful. And he said, the reason I've been that successful is there's plenty for everybody. And I think it was you even, Mike, that maybe posted something recently that I'd never heard it quite that way before, but this is what I'm talking about, where it said, you can accomplish everything you want to accomplish as long as you help everybody else accomplish everything they want to accomplish. And that was the essence. It wasn't said to me that way, but that was the essence of what at the time, this partner that was making head and shoulders more money than everybody else, had the biggest practice of anybody else. And you would see him. He would make friends with even the people that were suing his clients. He would say, look, they got to do their job. We'll settle these things. We'll have more cases. He almost viewed it as these guys were his friends because they were creating business for him. If they didn't sue his clients, he wouldn't have any business. So he made friends with, literally everybody. And I'm not going to say he helped people sue his clients, but he kept friendly with everybody. And I know he reached a lot of mutually satisfactory settlements and resolutions because he would always do that. And I think I saw, an opportunity, if we go back, 15 years here, that I've been able, and we had somebody present at Dykema recently from Kellogg Business School in Chicago. And they said the most valuable people in any organization are connectors. are people that, that can connect. He said often you'll see it with priests and politicians because the priest has to go to the poor neighborhoods, the rich neighborhoods, wherever the politicians have to campaign in the poor neighborhoods, the middle neighborhoods, they got to talk to everybody, and if you can do that, if you're not a priest or politician, but in your line of business, you can do that and you can interface with everybody. It's going to be much more valuable. And, I tried, Mike, to do things without expectation of anything in return and put people together. And I've seen such enormous benefit from it that it was kind of self-perpetuating. It's like, one time I was like losing weight. And I remember, when you lose weight, you feel better and then you do better on the treadmill. And because you did better on the treadmill than you ever did before, it reinforces the idea to keep losing weight, even though it's hard. And that's the same thing here. This is hard flying all over the world and meeting people. And a lot of times you spend lonely nights in hotels because you flew across the world or across the country to meet people. But when I see Dykema and I stand there and I'm just like, wow, we set another attendance record. We're having a drone show or shooting off pyrotechnics and everybody's cheering, and the sponsors are lining up to write checks and stuff because they got such a good ROI on the event. It empowers me and makes me feel like, in the middle of that 3-hour flight when you're just bored and you want to, be to your destination, it makes it all worth it for me. It really, really does. So, I think I probably had the building blocks to do this, but it was only when I got some really good mentorship and I got some really incredible positive reinforcement from these actions that it really led me to, take this next level. I mean, I think almost, as almost every week, you're always texting me, where are you? Where are you this week? It's always something crazy. I think even you're surprised, you're like, where are you? I'm like, I was in Paris. Now I'm in London. I'm back in Vegas. And you're like, that's even worse than I thought.
My head is
it is.
Yep.
It's tough every week to do this, but it just keeps me alive, putting people together. And like I said recently, there was a LinkedIn post where somebody said, your event, I think my friend Amal said, your event is great. I love being on stage with you. I just said, look, as long as people keep showing up, I'm going to keep doing this. If I do it and it's like boring and nobody comes, and I guess I'll have to reevaluate. But lately, I've been wanting to get 60 people, I get 130. I want to get 2,000, I get 2,600. So as long as I keep blowing through attendance records and people keep showing up, I'm going to keep doing this because it makes me feel alive and I love doing it, Mike.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you, Brian. And thanks for coming on again for the three-peat.
Well, like I said, you've gotten good at this. You do a heck of an interview. And by the way, like I said, no one was expecting you 100 episodes ago to be good at this, but you've gotten really, really good with it. And as long as you're going to be as good as you are with this stuff, I'm going to keep coming. I like being on this show. And you're getting just a tremendous amount of positive feedback. The people that go on the show that are becoming bigger and bigger and more important figures are coming on the show. They like the experience. A lot of people follow you. Tons and tons of people, listen to this. So, you're doing a great job with it. And it's really my pleasure to be here with you.
Well, thank you, sir. Very much appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
All right.
All right. Take care.
The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.